Well, kia ora. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. And we're here in snowy Worcester, located in the heart of Massachusetts, central Massachusetts. And I'm Mike Elms, Professor of Organization Studies at WPI and the Director of the Wellington, New Zealand Project Center. Welcome to this WPI Global School Virtual Event webinar on Oceania. Before we start the webinar, I offer the following acknowledgements. We acknowledge the Nipmuc people as the original caretakers of the land in central Massachusetts, where WPI has its home. We also acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Maori, and Pacific Island peoples as the original custodians of the land on which the Melbourne, Aotearoa, and Hawaii WPI project centers serve in the region of Oceania. We pay our respects to these native peoples, their culture, and their elders, past, present, and future. And we extend a warm welcome to you and thanks to all of our guests, panelists, presenters, and invite you to participate. If you're a guest and not one of the panelists or organizers of the event, we invite you to post your questions to the question and answer function on Zoom, the Q&A. You'll see it there down in the bottom. Feel free to do that anytime during the event. Now, going to the next slide, you'll see the basic schedule here. We're going to start with, basically it's 3 hours long, and we're going to start with 2 keynote speakers, followed by a brief overview of our current existing WPI project centers across Oceania. And then we'll have 2 30-minute panels with our project partners related to our work with Indigenous communities and on climate resilience and sustainability. After the panels, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A and then move to closing statements and acknowledgements. Again, we thank all of you for participating and attending. And now I turn it over to our Provost and Senior Vice President, WPI, Wole Sobuoyeo, who has a few introductory remarks. First of all, I want to just say that, not to embarrass Wole, but he was just elected into the National Academy of Engineering. Congratulations, Wole.
Thank you, Mike. And it's really a pleasure to be here and to be part of this event on the future of Oceania. Next, please. So really, to all our participants from all across the world, it's really for me a special pleasure to welcome you to this 5th of our virtual events of the Global School. In this event, we will explore Oceania, which of course extends all the way from Hawaii to Papua New Guinea across the great expanse that goes from Fiji, New Zealand, Australia, to what we now refer to as Oceania. And our goal as we look at this part of the world is to bring together all our key stakeholders, our partners, our alumni, students, staff, and faculty, into an interdisciplinary collaboration in which we work with partners on programs of mutual interest. And what does WPI bring to this? It's really a history of using STEM to address global grand challenges in ways that can be related to the opportunities of engaging indigeneity, problems of development, and environmental grand challenges. And so it's this intersection between STEM and people and communities that we feel is a great opportunity for us to share with the world in our global school. Next, please. And so as we look at Oceania, as we go across from Polynesia to Micronesia, Melanesia, and Australasia, we see this opportunity next to connect to this eclectic series of islands with true, really rich indigenous cultures in ways that really connect to STEM. So if you go to the next view graph, many of us, of course, are familiar with these islands, and they're islands that are rich in history and beauty. But today we're going to focus on really thinking about the connections of these islands to STEM, and in some ways celebrate some of the emerging success of the indigenous people and begin to see how we, WPI, with our focus on STEM and global impact, can work with many groups, as we've been doing in our project centers, in ways that build on indigenous knowledge, in ways that build on indigenous science, in ways that connect to the future of these islands that are rich with possibilities. So next, please. So if we look at Oceania, it spans all the way from the eastern to the western hemispheres, and it has a population of just over 41 million people with 8.5 million square kilometers. And so in some senses, it's the second sort of in terms of population, in terms of the regions of the world, and rich with possibilities when you look at the cultures and traditions of the indigenous people, blended with the opportunity to bring a STEM culture to interface with this culture in ways that we would like to celebrate in this activity. And it has territories that span all the way from Hawaii, non-sovereign territories, to associated territories and fully independent countries. So very diverse indeed. Next. So as we think about this and thinking about what WPI brings to this, what we recognize is in looking at the history of the islands, especially in New Zealand, that the original people that settled in New Zealand migrated from Hawaii. And one of the people that is celebrated as part of that great migration is Wako Tirangi, who was a 13th century scientist. And I would say perhaps the first Oceanian female scientist. She collected different leaves and took them on the migration as they moved from Hawaii towards what is now modern day New Zealand. And she's most remembering for bringing Kumaira and various biological products with her on this journey. And she built these amazing gardens where they grew plants for sustenance of the people and for medicinal purposes. And the carving shown there is a depiction of Wakaru Tirangi, which basically many people today now acknowledge perhaps as the first female scientist of Oceania. And what's amazing is that, of course, these plants, of course, then enabled the food supply and the sustenance of the people in ways that we can celebrate today. And so who are the Waka Tirangis of today? Next, please. So it's interesting as we kind of look through some more recent examples of STEM leaders in Oceania. We see people like Dr. Ocean Mercier, who is a lecturer in physics, but also combines this with Maori science at the University of Wellington. We see people like Hiraya McRae, who is a senior lecturer in Maori education, who focuses on the role of STEM education amongst Indigenous people and is building a very successful platform in STEM education over there at the University of Victoria. Next, please. And this goes further. There are young Indigenous scientists, such as Corey Tutt, who is a Kamilaroi man, who promotes STEM and Indigenous education in Australia. And there are people like Pauline Harris, who's a senior lecturer, astrophysicist, who's using the Indigenous knowledge of Maori culture of the stars and giving a very different interpretation to the field of astrophysicists. So all of these Indigenous scientists in their own special and unique ways really offer us a more sort of global perspective of the universe around us. And they're exciting a new generation of people across Oceania into STEM. And so what can a place like WPI bring to this emerging culture, especially looking at this interface between STEM and grand challenge problems that we could work on together in collaboration with our counterparts across Oceania? Next, please. So as we look at this, we would like to think that for our global school, what we want to do is to look for purpose-driven impact, where we identify local global challenges, and then we engage in group activities in partnership with those that we want to collaborate with in a way that leads, hopefully over time, to local global solutions and impact. We can do this, of course, through research and innovation. We can do this through education and training for life. And we can do this, of course, through partnerships with different stakeholders. And in this case, what we're hoping to do is to build on the partnerships around our project centers and perhaps to reach out to scientists and people that are trying to make transformations through STEM. Next. And so for us, as we engage in projects in Oceania, we're really vested in the idea of Oceanian futures and looking at the economy beyond tourism and raw materials, building on indigenous knowledge, and really exploring the full meanings of indigeneity beyond the COVID era. And looking at how we can do things in collaboration with our partners that really amount to environmental problem solving around water, around land, looking at the impacts of climate change and development, and making sure that development is one in which the culture, the rich culture, history, and heritage of the people is sustained. And so for us, the partnerships that we're seeking to build in the Global School are really partnerships that we hope will enable this future with STEM as a driver of social change in ways that are respectful to the indigenous people of Oceania. Next. And so this is the 5th of our global series activities. And it's interesting just to look back at how far we've come in this academic year. Our first speaker was Robert Langer of MIT, and he talked about really biomedical innovations for global health. Ambassador Bafo Ajebawa of Ghana really looked at the opportunities for development and how a place like WPI could work with countries like Ghana in doing things that are impactful. Carlos Nobre, Nobel laureate from Brazil, talked about how we can do projects in the Amazon that can have an impact on the environment. Malak Al-Kili from Jordan was the keynote who talked about Middle Eastern futures in our last event. Today we have 2 keynote speakers. One is Mele Went from New Zealand, who will be talking to us about indigeneity, and the other is Holger Dressler from WPI, who will also be presenting to us today across this sea of Oceania, some opportunities for interactions. Next, please. And so as we look to today's event, first I want to thank our hosts, Mike Elms and Ingrid Shockey of WPI, for all the hard work they've done to organize this event. I want to thank our keynote speaker, Mele Went, from New Zealand, who will talk to us about identity, challenges, and opportunities of Indigenous people. And I also want to appreciate our second keynote speaker, Holger Dressler, who will present a talk on the Sea of Islands, which will be an introduction to the history of Oceania. And before closing, I want to thank our folks that will participate in the panel discussions in what promises to be a rich and exciting event. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mike. Mike, please.